Hello, everyone. Welcome to our latest live chat. Today I'm talking to Dick Lochte about his comedy noir thriller Sleeping Dog. It's one of the most acclaimed crime novels ever. And Dick, I just want to thank you so much for joining us today. We're so happy to have you here.
It's a pleasure to be here.
And just a little bit more about Sleeping Dog for those who don't know. It was named a New York Times Book of the Year and a Nero Wolfe Award winner. And it was also named by the Independent Mystery Booksellers Association as one of the 100 favorite mysteries of the century. And before we begin the chat, I just wanted to remind everyone watching to enter to win a copy of Sleeping Dog after. And so, Dick, we'd love to hear more about Sleeping Dog. Can you tell us all about it and the writing process?
Oh, sure, sure. To begin, I guess we're talking about Sleeping Dog, which is
Yes.
great. Uh, as you say, it's sort of a comedy noir novel. There's some dark sides to it and some quite a bit of humor. It focuses on two characters. The Serendipity Dahlquist is a
Hmm.
14-year-old schoolgirl who's very strong-willed and uh, demanding. The other character is Leo Bloodworth, who's sort of a
Hmm.
middle-aged, world-weary private eye who really doesn't like teenagers of any kind, but especially isn't terribly happy being in the company of Serendipity. They come together when her dog goes missing. She's got a pet bull terrier that she loves.
Hmm.
Uh, it goes missing from the home that she shares with her grandmother, who's a soap opera diva.
Hmm.
And she goes to the cops to try to find the dog. The cops are not interested at all in finding the dog, but one of the detectives suggests as a joke that she go see Leo Bloodworth, who's a private eye who
Hmm.
specializes in finding things. He's called Leo the Bloodhound Bloodworth. She shows up there, and Leo really wants nothing to do with her. He says that he doesn't do dogs, and she's leaving the office when this sort of less scrupulous private eye who shares the office with Leo, a guy named
Hmm.
Casper, agrees to help her. He senses that he's going to be able to make a few bucks from her. So we cut ahead maybe a week. Leo is in a bar, a little drunk, talking to one of the ladies who frequents the bar, and
Hmm.
Serendipity shows up, and she demands that he take her to Casper's home. She paid him to do a job. She can't get hold of him. She's tried to
Hmm.
reach him. He doesn't answer the phone. Leo suddenly realizes that he hasn't seen Casper in a while too. He agrees to
Hmm.
take her. They discover Casper has been murdered.
Wow.
A few days later, Serendipity's grandmother is brutally beaten. Leo finds himself stuck with Serendipity. They realize, or he realizes, that the girl's mother, who's something of a hot mess, has taken the dog. She and her new boyfriend, who's a sort of low-rung member of the Mexican mafia, have taken the dog. They, the boyfriend is a bag man who travels across California collecting the receipts from the dogfight operation that the mafia is hosting.
Hmm.
So most of the novel is a sort of road trip with Serendipity and Leo trying to find the dog, the mother, the boyfriend. They're a few steps behind them, meeting all these characters, weird characters, and having adventures. They're also a
Awesome.
few steps ahead of a brutal killer who's
Hmm.
sort of got them in the sights. So that's essentially where we are.
Fantastic.
Um,
Now, I
and now,
love the. Oh, sure, go ahead.
no, I just go ahead. Look.
I love the character names in the book. Now, what was your process? Did they kind of just pop into your mind? Did you use anagrams? Was there any sort of, process to that?
Well, I wanted for the little girl, I wanted somebody a name that was sort of particularly a sort of '60s kind of name because her
Yeah.
parents were hippies, and I
Hmm.
thought Serendipity would be a good type name for that.
Yeah, it's perfect.
Dahlquist was a name of a girl I knew in Chicago, so
Ah,
I put those
cool.
names together. Leo Bloodworth, I don't know. I wanted something that was close to Bloodhound, and
Yeah.
Bloodworth sort of popped up. Leo, I don't know where that came from, but it
Yeah.
was just there. I should say the other thing about it that's sort of unusual about the book is that the first chapter is told by Serendipity. The second chapter is told by Leo, and it goes on like that with them switching chapters, sometimes talking about the same scene so that you get two different points of view on the same uh,
Interesting.
adventures that they're having. I
That's
think that was
great.
one of the things that the critics seemed to like a lot about the book.
Great. Was there any book that kind of you modeled it after when you were doing the back and forth perspective, or
No, as
no?
far as I know, at the time, that was a pretty original way of
Yeah.
doing the books.
Yeah, I'd say
More
so.
recently, more recently now, point of view has changed quite a bit. There are now people doing all sorts of points of view.
Yeah.
They mix first person with third person. But back a few years ago, they didn't do that at all. It was pretty standard to write in first person if you were a private eye writer. Uh,
Absolutely.
so, so it was
Yeah.
a little unusual.
Yeah. Um, Now we have so many questions coming in, and Lynn wants to know, was there any, did you have any creative input on the covers of the book?
No, quite the contrary. Well,
Oh, really?
the original cover of the book was a terrible cover, and uh,
Mm-hmm.
the publisher realized it at the time and changed it,
Uh,
it's an okay cover. The continuing covers haven't been very good until this one, which I think is the best cover I've ever had for this book. I
mm-hmm.
mean,
Yeah, I
it
love it.
really tells you what the book is about, and it's also a very nice piece of artwork.
Mm-hmm. Now Zach wants to know what initially drew you to the crime genre. Do you have any favorite, crime TV shows or books right now that you can think of?
Well, originally I just wrote what I like to read, and
Mm-hmm.
I was very, very influenced by Raymond Chandler. I think almost any writer that was doing it or has been doing it, Chandler is the big influence on just about
Yeah.
everybody. And that's what I was going for with Leo, trying to make him a sort of Chandler-esque, but also maybe a little more realistic than Chandler's Private Eye.
Yeah. Um, Jennifer says, how much research went into Sleeping Dog and Laughing Dog? And she said, did you shadow mob families?
No, I didn't. The mob stuff it wasn't terribly well researched. It was just sort of stuff I came up with. The
Yeah.
dogfight stuff, on the other hand, required a certain amount of research. At that particular time, the LA Times was running a series of news reports about
Mm-hmm.
the dogfights in California.
Oh.
And so I had a lot of good information there. And I also got some information from a really brilliant piece that a writer named Harry Cruz had done, I think, in Esquire magazine,
Mm-hmm.
of his witnessing a dogfight that took place in Florida.
Oh.
And I got a lot of information out of that too. I didn't. I also spoke to one of the people who prepares dogs for fights.
Oh.
I didn't have the heart to actually witness a dog fight,
Hmm.
and so I sort of had to fudge that a little bit.
Nah.
But yeah, that was the main research.
Now, did you already have the idea for the book in mind before you started saying the dog fight ideas? Did you bring the dog idea in when you saw that? Like, where did the idea for the sleeping dog come from? Was it from
Well, you
a variety of things?
originally my idea was that I had a little boy
Hmm.
who lived on a horse farm, and
Hmm.
what also was happening at the time was that horses were being stolen from California,
Hmm.
racehorses, and brought to Mexico, where they would be just about raced to death.
Hmm.
There was horse napped. And
Yeah.
so my original idea was to have the little boy and a horse trainer go into Mexico to try to recover the horse that was stolen.
Yeah.
Um, but then a movie called Black Stallion, a book and movie came out that was about a little boy and a horse.
Hmm.
So I simply changed it to a little girl and a dog, or a
Yeah.
teenage girl and a dog, and a private eye, which actually I think worked out a lot better.
Yeah. Now, was there a character in the book that you found was the hardest to write for, or were they all, did they just come natural to you?
Well, I would have thought the little girl would have been hard, but I had taken I'd done a screenwriting job for a producer
Oh, neat.
that required. It was very difficult for me, but it required my spending time in St. Bart's with his family while we wrote
Hmm.
the screenplay. And
Hmm.
he had a 14-year-old daughter
Hmm.
who I observed every day. So she really became the model for Serendipity.
Cool.
So not at all hard to write.
Yeah. Speaking of screenplays, Ken wants to know if one of your books were made into a feature film, would you want to be the one to write the screenplay, or would you not want anything to do with that?
Well, I can tell you from experience.
Hmm.
I when Sleeping Dog was originally purchased for film,
Hmm.
I agreed to do the screenplay, and it took me over a year to write about 15 different versions of the
Wow.
screenplay. Um, the movie didn't get made, and what happened was it was several years later that the second
Hmm.
book in the series came out, which was not a good thing. I should have let someone else try to write that screenplay and continued writing the books.
Hmm.
So my advice is for your own books.
Yeah.
I think it's always better to let somebody else write the screenplay. It, it's
Interesting.
it's a different format.
Yeah.
You sort of hate to lose stuff
Hmm.
that another writer can just sort of be a little harder and crueler on the material than you would
Hmm.
be.
Yeah. Something so close to you, you're looking at it all the time too. It's interesting to have
Right,
to, put it into that type of format. Um,
exactly.
how does Sleeping Dog compare with your earlier works? Lynn wants to know.
Well, it was my first book, so the earlier works were primarily newspaper articles. I was a journalist and a
Hmm.
critic, so I didn't really do an awful lot of fiction. I had written one short story that appeared in Ellery Queen's mystery magazine,
Uh-huh.
and it was entirely different. It was an entirely different type of thing.
Hmm.
This was fairly
Yeah.
new for me.
Now Ken says you're pretty well known for being a great book reviewer, and he says, do you think that analyzing other people's works in that capacity has helped you the way you approach your own writing?
Yes, I think that's very true that you sort of begin to get a sense of what works and what doesn't by seeing the
Right.
mistakes other people have made, or not just the mistakes, but sometimes when
Hmm.
they're the things that they do right. Um, yeah, it's very influential, and the opposite is true also, that
Yeah.
having written a book, I think makes me a little better critic because I now understand what actually goes into the writing of a book.
Hmm.
So I don't know. I don't think it makes me an easier critic, but
Hmm.
at least I know a little bit more about it.
Yeah. Now, speaking of kind of what goes into the writing of a book, Nicole wants to know, did you write an outline or did the plot and the characters, evolve as you wrote the story? Do you plan it out, or are you kind of seat of your pants writer?
Well, the first book, Sleeping Dog, was I didn't have an outline. I
Mm-hmm.
just went straight ahead and let it happen as it happened.
Yeah.
From that point on, however, though, once you sell your first book,
Mm-hmm.
and you begin to get uh, sign contracts for future books, they require that you provide them with an outline of the book before they give you the go-ahead to write it. So from that point on, every book that I've written has had an outline. I don't like outlines. I think in 9 times out of 10, the book comes out, it hasn't followed the outline very much at all.
Yeah. So this book, it's a re-release by Brash Books. How is that, process kind of seeing this come alive again? What's that been
It,
like?
it's been fa- it's been fantastic.
Great.
You write a book, you love the book. The book did
Mm-hmm.
very well at its time, but it's been a while, and you would like other people, new readers to find the book again, and Brash Books is making that possible, and doing it in a
Mm-hmm.
very, very nice big way. Something I didn't think was going to be possible.
Yeah, it's amazing.
So I'm a
Um,
happy man.
that's good. Um, so we know that you've co-authored with some people, and Ken wants to know, what was it like co-authoring with Christopher Darden, and do you find it easier or harder to write with another person?
Well, in the case of Christopher, it was easier because Christopher
Mm-hmm.
is very, very knowledgeable. I'm not. These were legal thrillers that I was
Yeah,
doing with Christopher, and there's something nice about being able to pick up the phone and say, "Well, listen,
right.
what's courtroom B look like down at City Hall?" And Christopher
Yeah.
could give me a beautiful outline of exactly the way the courtroom looks. So it's nice to have someone who really is knowledgeable and
Mm-hmm.
in the case of Christopher, who sort of, he's not bad at creating plots and characters. So he was
Yeah.
a good collaborator.
Now you also collaborated with Al Roker. What was that like?
That was a little slightly difficult because
Different.
Al wasn't in the city, so
Yeah.
everything that we did had to be done electronically or by phone. So
Mm-hmm.
I would write something, I would send it to Al. Al would make his comments on it and send it back to me.
Mm-hmm.
The process was a little wasn't quite as simple as it was with Chris. With Chris, I would just simply meet with him at a deli
Right.
that he particularly likes. We'd sit down
Nice.
and have huge breakfasts, from which I would sort of waddle away, and Chris would, look the same at the end of the breakfast. So.
Awesome. Now, back to Sleeping Dog. I love that title. Did you have any other working titles for it before you decided on that final one?
No, that was
Yeah.
the original title. For a while,
Hmm.
the publisher toyed with the idea of calling it The Sleeping Dog Murder. I don't know why that was, but we agreed not to do it that way, so it came out Sleeping Dog.
Yeah. Nicole says Sleeping Dog was named, as we mentioned before, one of the 100 favorite mysteries of the century. Was that what prompted you to write a sequel? And she says, do you think there will be another title in the mix in the future? Is there anything coming up? Anything new?
Well, I'd written the sequel before the book was named one of the best books of the millennium.
Hmm.
Um, the I do have a title. I do
Cool.
have a couple of titles coming up. One of them is Devil Dog, which I hope to. I've done a short story called Devil Dog,
Hmm.
but the book is going to be a much longer version of that.
Hmm.
I think, uh, and in it, Leo gets a new dog, a sort of big Bouvier. which is
Ah,
like a 70-pound sheepdog, uh, which is
yeah,
very similar to a dog that I had for a long period of time.
nice. So, what was your favorite character, or who did you relate to the most, do you think, in the books?
Oh, I guess I related more to Leo, I suppose, than to Serendipity. Although,
Right.
yeah, I definitely. I mean, I put a lot of myself into Leo, which is what you
Mm-hmm.
do. Although
Mm-hmm.
I suspect some of me got into Serendipity also. So it's what happens when you write a book. You're also writing about other people, but you're pretty much writing about yourself too.
Exactly. Brooke has an interesting question. The digital world and social media is big with book promotion, and she wants to know, do you use social media? What are your thoughts about social media and the promotion of books through that in general?
Well, I don't know. I just sort of was blind to it up until
Mm-hmm.
about 4 or 5 years ago when I decided to just go for it and
Mm-hmm.
became got a page on Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest. I mean, just did the whole 9 yards. So now I'm pretty much out there. I think.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I think it's crucial now just for the sale of books to use the internet.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Elizabeth wants to know, what is the most rewarding thing about writing?
Well, I guess the most rewarding thing is to be able to create something that other people will enjoy. I mean, the
Mm-hmm.
idea of writing is always to write something that will be entertaining or will create some pleasure for the reader, and that's probably the thing that you hope to do the most.
Mm-hmm. She also she asks, how do you think your writing has changed from when you first started writing to now, if you can see any change?
Well, it's hard for you to see changes in your own style. I
Yeah.
think that as you get older, you see the world a bit differently. You may become a little more cynical or a
Hmm.
little less naive about certain things, and I'm
Right.
sure that's reflected in your work, whether you realize it or not. Um, a passage or a description of writing that I've always really liked comes from Graham Greene, and he said that
Hmm.
all writers have a sort of uh, icicle or a needle-sized icicle in their hearts, which means that uh, the writer is always looking to write. They 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 have very little compunction about what they write. You just absolutely have to write, and there's nothing else that can stand in the way. So I
Right.
think the older you get, the more that compunction continues.
I like that. And what's the best piece of advice? I really like that quote. Zach wants to know well, actually, he wants to know the least helpful piece of advice you've ever gotten when it comes to writing, or
The
most.
least well, the least helpful, I think, comes from
Oh, a little break. Oh, just sit tight, guys. We're having technical difficulties. And I want to remind everyone to enter to win a copy of Sleeping Dog after the chat. And hopefully, Dick will be back with us shortly.
looking at the back of their husband's neck and reaching for a knife. You know, there's anytime anybody gives you a cut and dried rule about writing, is something that that is least helpful. You should be
Mhm.
able to write whatever you feel like writing.
Right. Um, Lauren has another interesting question about,
Are you with me there, or have we lost
can you
control?
see me?
I'm not seeing you.
Can you hear me? Can you not see us? Hmm.
So I'm not sure what's going on now.
All right, I'll put something through for him if he can't see me. I don't know if he. Hello?
Yes, I have written
Oh,
screenplays. My favorite movies, I guess, recently, my movies are a little, uh, well, let's see, a favorite memory. Um, well, one of the memories is of being with Jodie Foster in Canada. And she was probably about the age of Serendipity at that time. She was about 14, making a movie called The Little Girl Who Lives Down the Lane. And we were sitting around talking, and the young actor who was with her, they were talking about what they were going to do during the summer. And the young actor who was with them said, well, he was going to spend the summer, I don't know, you know, visiting with his parents somewhere. And Jodie Foster's comment was, well, she thought she might go to Paris. I thought, well, you know, this is a new kind of Hollywood for me.
can you see or hear me? He can't. I guess not.
Right
Hmm.
now, I think mainly it's people in my life that influence me the most. You know, you meet people that sort of trigger something in your head, and you start to think, well, yeah, maybe they could fit into a book, or maybe there is something about them, or maybe it's a story they tell that you start to thinking about how you might be able to use that in a book. Well, I think one thing about the crime genre is that, unlike most fiction or much other fiction, crime fiction has a conclusion to it. There's a finality to it. Usually a crime is solved or the crime isn't solved, but by the very end of it, you have reached a decision. Crime books usually create order in the universe, and I think people like to have that because there's so much confusion and disorder in real life. A favorite book of mine that I've written. Oh boy, it's usually the book that you've most recently written, but obviously Sleeping Dog is a favorite. It was my first book. The, it was a book that I wrote without any pressures, without anything particular in mind other than writing a book that I really I wanted to write. Ever since then, you're always writing for contract, or you're writing for you know, to make sure that you get a book out. But I think Sleeping Dog is probably my favorite. Uh, I'm also particularly fond of a book called The Neon Smile, which was more in the private eye line, and was written about my native city of New Orleans. Well, the Nero Wolfe Award is presented to a book that sort of comes close to what the society feels is similar to the books that Rex Stout wrote, which means they're good mysteries. They have a good sense of humor. Um, I was very happy to win it because, gosh, it was my first book and it was my first prize. And but I wasn't able.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Cool.
Love to have seen. Yes, I hope so. From time to time, I've thought about writing another book, but I've satisfied myself writing short stories. There are about 10 stories featuring the characters, and eventually I'm going to hope to have them all on Kindle at least, if not in a book format. Um, but I do have an idea for this Devil Dog, which is a novel that'll bring them back again, maybe next year. It's been a pleasure, and I'm very happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
All right, thank you everyone for joining. It was so nice to have Dick Lochte here, the author of Sleeping Dog, and just stop by BookTrib after this to enter to win a copy of Sleeping Dog. Thanks, guys. Have a great day. Bye.